Today's sermon is titled, He Called Me Brother, Lessons from Death Row, to be delivered by the Reverend Lynn Hopkins. The Reverend Lynn Hopkins is a Unitarian Universalist minister serving the UU Fellowship of Montgomery, Alabama. Lynn is a lifelong activist for justice and equity since the days of the Vietnam War. Raised in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., Lynn and Lynn's spouse, Carolyn, lived for 20 years in the Atlanta area and then in Denver, Colorado, briefly before settling in Montgomery in 2014. In all of those places, Lynn was engaged in public advocacy, protest, testimony, and other activities in areas of sexuality and gender equity, racial equity, poverty and homelessness, criminal justice, disability access, and more. Currently, Lynn serves as co-chair of Interfaith Montgomery, on the board of Montgomery Pride United, and the Leadership Council of Faith in Action, Alabama, and is a member of Trust, Transgender, Religious, Professional UUs Together. Lynn identifies as queer and is gender non-binary and prefers the use of Lynn's first name in place of pronoun. I give you the Reverend Lynn.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Andy and Rebecca, for your music and your gracious, generous selection of music so that I didn't have that task as well. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. I'm sorry that Randy is not here today. I understand he's traveling. But Randy noticed the tagline on my email when he contacted me about something else and was intrigued. My email under my name and address says, I have a brother on death row, and so do you. So I want to start with a story. In 1989, a summer night in Savannah, young people out at the local pool hall, and Larry, the local homeless guy, had managed to get his hands on a six-pack Red. A neighborhood tough guy, well known to police and locals, decided he was going to take that beer from Larry. Couple of recent high school graduates, Dee Dee and Troy, saw the disturbance and went to confront Red. Leave Larry alone. As the two of them approached, Red pistol whipped Larry, and police officer working security at the Burger King next door heard the disturbance and comes running. Suddenly, shots ring out. Officer Mark McPhail is hit once in the chest and then again in the head after he goes down. Dee Dee and Troy take off running. In the morning, Red appears at the police station with his attorney and says he saw Troy murder Officer McPhail. Arrest and conviction happened quickly. No physical evidence, no gun, blood, DNA, gunshot residue. The only physical description available didn't fit Troy in any respect. But police managed to find a few folks who were already on probation, who could be coerced or threatened into representing themselves as eyewitnesses. The recantation of the eyewitness testimony began before the trial was over, but the jury had no idea of the many problems with every one of the prosecution witnesses. Ultimately, they all recanted except Red. Now, As you may know, all of the rights and protections afforded to citizens evaporate at the moment of conviction. There is no presumption of innocence or even benefit of the doubt. That guarantee to competent counsel is gone. Most states provide some post-conviction representation, but it's not required. Many states severely limit it. Georgia, at that time, provided no representation at all. And of course, there's this common misconception that the appeal process gives people a chance to show that the court got it wrong. But once a person is convicted, all the presumption goes to guilt. Testimony given at trial under oath is regarded as more trustworthy than anything given post-trial, even if it's supported by physical evidence. It requires an extraordinary circumstance of specific, documented, provable, deliberate, or grossly negligent error to even gain access to the appeals process. And the court is under no obligation to take seriously the claims that are made after conviction. There is a clear and widely acknowledged preference in post-conviction process for finality over fairness. Our Supreme Court has actually made clear that innocence, factual innocence, is not a legal guarantee against being executed. Troy Anthony Davis was actually innocent. And he was killed by the state of Georgia on September 21st, 2011. Over the objections of dignitaries and statesmen around the world, Jimmy Carter, Desmond Tutu, Pope Benedict, even arch conservatives like Bob Barr and William Sessions, people firmly in support of the death penalty spoke out when they saw how indefensible process was in this case. Most of us are sure that wrongful conviction occurs in a tiny fraction of cases and can be corrected when it does occur. But the course of Troy's process made painfully clear how unlikely it is that wrongful conviction will ever be overturned, and how unimaginably difficult it is to establish legal exoneration. But even as difficult as it is, since 1973, 186 people under death sentence have been exonerated. That's 1 for every 8 people we have executed since then. 1 for every 8. You can imagine if a new drug caused irreparable harm in 1 case for every 8. The failure rate of the system is unconscionable, and most of our failures are never uncovered. The vast majority of wrongfully convicted persons never get access to that invisible key that could unlock justice, and that's not by mistake. Our system is designed that way. Finality over fairness. Once a felony conviction is reached, an individual is in a separate category, legally separate from citizenship, and effectively separate from humanity. It's always been so in this country, and that's a problem for me. It's a problem for me because as a Unitarian Universalist like you, I'm in covenant with UUs all over the world that we will affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Inherent, meaning it can't be separated or stripped away. It can't be spent or discarded. Every person, every single person, not people, not even all people, but each individual. The necessity of social order, the protection of society, of preventing and responding to crime, especially violent crime, those things are real. But just as real is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. the ones we call criminals, as if criminal was a category or a species distinct from human. And I'm convinced that no one actually wants to execute innocent people, even the ones who adamantly pursue those executions. And we trick ourselves into believing in the integrity of the justice system because it's unimaginable that it could be that flawed. But here's the thing. As I got to know Troy through visits and letters and phone conversations, and through getting to know his family, it opened up a different way for me of seeing the whole situation. My spouse and I made contact with Troy when we learned about his case because we were convinced of his innocence. But as we got to know Troy and experience his heart and his spirit, it was no longer about innocence. He helped us to see the inherent worth and dignity of all the guys there without regard to guilt or innocence. Today, when I meet a person under death sentence, I don't care whether he or she actually did the crime. I don't need to know the story that brought them to the place, unless they want me to. And it doesn't matter if I can believe their account or not. Inherent worth and dignity. Now, I don't mean to suggest that I've attained the capacity for unconditional love of every person. I'm still fully human, subject to the revulsion and rage that rises when we hear some of these stories. Hey, I couldn't sit down with Dylan Roof after he killed the worshipers in Charlotte, or Peyton Gendron, who killed the grocery shoppers in Buffalo. I have limits, but they are subject to change, and I work on them every day. Once I was in an event with Sister Helen Prejean, of Dead Man Walking fame. Someone asked her, how do you do this work without getting attached? I knew her answer before she spoke it. You don't. If you can do this work without feeling a connection with the people you're visiting, then it serves no purpose. Of course, you connect. Connection is the point. See, connection is how we recognize and honor the humanity, the inherent worth and dignity of other human beings. My personal theology is a relational theology. God is what happens when human beings connect and break the illusion of our separateness. I know y'all have talked about restorative justice, the powerful process that can bring healing and reconciliation to the lives of people shattered by violent crime, both victims and perpetrators. Obviously, it's the ideal response, but requires voluntary participation of everyone involved, which means it's unworkable in many, if not most cases. But what we are doing doesn't work. Caging and dehumanizing people, most of whom will return to society after some years, only serves to increase the problems we face. We've long established the failure of mass incarceration as a deterrent to crime. I'm not a social scientist. I don't have the prescription, but rooted in my religious convictions as a Unitarian Universalist, I'm clear about a few things. Incarceration is almost never the best possible response. I know that every one of us is capable of acts that could be subject to the most severe punishment. And none of us is defined by the worst thing we've ever done. I also know that no system we could ever design would be perfect enough to be a rational basis for taking life. I know, and I've seen up close how capital punishment has never served as a deterrent to crimes it covers, and ultimately dehumanizes everyone involved, from corrections officers and medical personnel to prosecutors and police to the surviving family of crime victims. And one more thing I know, not only from my belief or process of reason, but through my lived experience, the end result of execution always is not closure or justice, but only more suffering. Execution gives us only another grieving family. I took the title today from an article written by Reverend Randy Loney, Troy's longtime pastor. He was talking about a visit to an inmate on Georgia's death row shortly after Troy's execution. And he says, he told me he had once needed paper and a pencil to write letters home. He mentioned his need to Troy, and soon the man found a pad of paper and a pencil on his bunk. Another prisoner explained how Troy greeted him warmly the day he arrived on death row, and how over time Troy's friendship helped him face living in death's shadow. Another prisoner explained to me, Troy taught me how to be a man. He didn't blow up in adversity. I asked this same man when we joked about prisoners' nicknames, what did Troy call you? And the man paused, overcome by emotion, and answered, he called me his brother. This man, a guy from the Deep South, and Troy Davis, a Black man from Savannah, were brothers. Troy knew it, and he wasn't afraid to say it. I could talk to you for hours about the details of this case and all the things that went wrong, or about the dozen or so similar cases I'm watching right now in various states determined to take lives as quickly as possible. But my time is up. So let me conclude by saying that I know death row work isn't for everyone. It requires an enormous reservoir of faith, resilience, compassion, forgiveness, and determination. It's often too much for me. But everyone who is committed, as I am, to affirming and promoting the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and to affirming and promoting justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, has a role to play in this struggle. We can stand vigil every time a state takes a life, even if it's not our state. We can study and learn the facts and share them with anyone likewise committed to affirming humanity. We can write letters to governors, boards of pardon and parole, district attorneys. We can send money or volunteer support to organizations working to end execution and those working to represent the targets of execution. I know you have a lot on your plate and a lot on your hearts these days, but you are not without power to change the world. And I promise you that together we can do just that. May it be so.